Alright guys, so if you remember in the previous video, we left off with just a few extra practice problems left for the quadratic formula. So at this point, if you are one of those people that needed a little bit of extra practice, we're going to go ahead and go through those last few examples. So there are 4 examples in total that we're going to take a look at, and hopefully this will help to give you a little bit better understanding of what to be doing. So the first example that we're going to look at would be the first example that we skipped over, which is going to be x squared plus 7x is equal to x minus 10. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get our equation set equal to 0. So my suggestion would be to move the x over and to also add over the 10. So you're basically going to be doing 2 things to get one side of the equation to equal 0. And I'm going to do it kind of both at once. So subtract x and add 10 to both sides of your equation. So what that'll mean is the right hand side, x minus x is 0, negative 10 plus 10 is 0. So now you've got the right side of your equation equal to 0. As for the left side, x squared has nothing to combine with. 7 minus 1 is a plus 6x, and then 10 plus nothing is just 10. All right, so now we should be ready to go ahead and figure out what A, B, and C are. So A is going to be positive 1, B is going to be 6, C is going to be 10. So putting those into our formula, x is equal to the opposite of b, so opposite of 6 is negative 6, plus and minus the square root of b squared, which is 6 squared, minus 4 multiplied by a, which is 1, multiplied by c, which is 10. All over 2a, so that's 2 multiplied by 1. All right, so now let's go ahead and work to simplify, especially what's underneath that square root sign. So that would be 6 squared, which is 36. And again, remember, let's multiply together these 3 numbers right here. So that's negative 4 multiplied by 1, multiplied with 10, which is negative 40. So we'll write that as a minus 40, all over 2 multiplied by 1, which is 2. So now we'll go ahead and simplify what's underneath our square root sign. So that would be 36 minus 40, which is negative 4, all over 2. Now, if you remember what we talked about in the previous section, solving by square roots, we talked about the fact that you cannot take the square root of a negative number. And when that happens, we wrote that there was no solution. And in fact, here we're going to have to say the same thing. Because of that negative 4 is underneath the square root sign, we can't go any further. We're just going to have to write that there is no solution, and then we'll actually just be done. All right, let's take a look at the next example. So we've got x squared plus 4x plus 1 is equal to 0. So it's already in standard form for us. Notice that it's already equal to 0. So we'll already be able to say that a is 1, b is 4, and c is 1. So let's go and put those into our formula. So we're going to have the opposite of b, so opposite of 4, which is negative 4, plus and minus the square root of b squared, which is 4 squared, minus 4 multiplied by a, which is 1, multiplied by c, which is also 1, all over 2a, which is 2 multiplied by 1. So then that's going to be negative 4, plus and minus the square root of 4 squared, which is 16, and then negative 4 multiplied with 1, multiplied with 1 is going to be negative 4, so we'll write that as a minus 4, all over 2 multiplied by 1, which is 2. So then let's go ahead and keep simplifying, starting with what's underneath our square root. 16 minus 4 is 12. Everything else stays the same. And now we'll go ahead and try to simplify that square root. The square root of 12, we could divide by 4, which is a perfect square. So we could rewrite that as the square root of 4 multiplied by the square root of 3 over 2. And the reason we would want to do that is that this square root of 4 is going to simplify. The square root of 4 we know is going to be equal to 2. So now it's going to say negative 4 plus or minus. We'll replace that square root of 4 with a 2. And then go ahead and write the square root of 3 after it. and then put the 2 underneath. Now, in order to simplify, what you're then going to need to do is look to see if there's any common factors for these 3 numbers, which I'm going to circle for us right here. Sometimes I kind of have fun with it, and I call it the Mickey Mouse numbers, just because when you circle them, it kind of makes a Mickey Mouse head. But what you're looking for is if those numbers are divisible by any common factor, any number that they could all be divided by. And since they're all even, that means they could all be divided by 2. In other words, negative 4 divided by 2 is going to be negative 2. 2 divided by 2 is going to be 1. And 2 divided by 2 is also going to be 1. And then we'll just kind of fill everything else in around it. So the plus and minus and the square root of 3. And now we just look to see if there's anything that we don't need. So really, if you think about it, we don't need to be worried about dividing by 1. We don't need to be worried about multiplying by 1. So really, all we need to have is the negative 2, the plus and minus, and the square root of 3. Now, we're not going to necessarily need to, but if you wanted to separate those into its separate answers, you still could. So remember to do that, you just write one of them as plus, so that would be negative 2 plus the square root of 3, and that's actually not going to be able to simplify, so you just leave it like that. And the same is true of the minus. You would say negative 2 minus the square root of 3, and there would be your second answer. So you can still break it apart if you would want to. You could also just leave it as negative 2 plus and minus the square root of 3. That would also work. Okay, let's take a look at 2 more problems, and I think that'll be it for this section of the notes. All right, so for this next problem, we've got x squared plus x plus 9 is equal to 20. So it's not equal to 0, so that would be where we would need to start. Let's go ahead and subtract 20 from both sides. So now the right side of our equation is equal to 0, and the left side is x squared plus x minus 11. Now that we've got it equal to 0, we should be good to go ahead and say what a, b, and c are. It looks like a is going to be 1, b is also 1, and c is negative 11. So now putting those into our formula, we're going to say x is equal to the opposite of b, so opposite of 1 is negative 1, plus and minus your square root of b squared, which is 1 squared, minus 4 multiplied by a, which is 1, multiplied by c, which is negative 11. All of that goes over to a, so that's 2 multiplied by 1. All right, so let's simplify, starting with what's underneath our square root sign. 1 squared is just 1, and then we'll multiply together these 3 numbers. So negative 4 multiplied with 1, multiplied with negative 11 is a positive 44, so we'll write that as plus 44. And then 2 multiplied by 1 is just 2. As we continue to simplify, we're going to take 1 plus 44, which is 45 under our square root sign. And now we're going to want to rewrite our square root of 45 using perfect squares. Turns out 45 is divisible by 9. It's the same as saying 9 times 5. So that'll be how we'll rewrite our square root of 45. Next, we'll go ahead and see if we can simplify. We'll look at that square root of 9 in particular, because we know the square root of 9 is just 3. So we'll say negative 1 plus and minus. We'll replace that square root of 9 with a 3. And then go ahead and copy down the rest. So the square root of 5 over 2. Now, just like we did before, we're going to check these 3 numbers to see if we can divide them by the same thing. And this time, negative 1, 3, and 2, we can't divide by any of the same number. So we're just going to actually leave that as our final answer. So negative 1 plus and minus 3 square root of 5 over 2. And again, if you wanted to break that apart as plus and minus, you could. This time, I'll just leave that as my final answer. All right, let's take a look at one last problem, and I think that'll be good for this section. So our last example is that x squared is equal to negative 3x plus 6. All right, so again, we need to have one side of our equation equal to 0. So let's go ahead and get the right side of our equation to equal 0. So that would be to add 3x to both sides and subtract 6. So to add 3x and subtract 6. That way on the right side, everything is going to cancel to be 0. And for the left side, nothing is going to combine. So we'll just write everything separately. So now that it's equal to 0, we can go ahead and write what a, b, and c are. So a is going to be 1, b is going to be 3, and c is going to be negative 6. So now, putting those into our formula, we're going to say x is equal to the opposite of b. So opposite of 3 is negative 3, plus and minus the square root of b squared, which is 3 squared, minus 4 multiplied by a, which is 1, multiplied by c, which is negative 6. All over 2a, so that's 2 multiplied by 1. So now let's go ahead and work to simplify, starting with everything underneath of our square root sign. So 3 squared is going to be 9, and then negative 4 multiplied with 1 multiplied with negative 6 is a positive 24. So we'll write that as a plus 24, all over 2 multiplied by 1, which is 2. So then let's go ahead and keep simplifying what's underneath of our square root sign. So 9 plus 24 is 33, all over 2. So now we need to think about a perfect square that we can divide 33 by, and the only perfect square that will work for is 1, but really 1 isn't going to help us. The square root of 1 is just 1, and that's not going to change anything. So actually at this point, we would be done. Here is our final answer. Again, if you want to break it apart plus and minus, you could, but you don't need to. Alright guys, so that wraps up quadratic formula. Obviously we saw some kind of different examples in this video, so hopefully you found that to be helpful. Until next time, have a good rest of your day.